Hello, everyone. Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you're joining us. Welcome to our online Obot workshop. We'll be going over the Model Context Protocol, MCP, and how to, what that is and going through and setting up the catalog and making it enterprise ready. I'm Bill Maxwell. I'm a software architect over here at Obot. I'll be giving this talk today, and I'm joined by Connie Lin, our marketing manager.
Hello.
And so this is about a 60-minute workshop. We'll be doing some demos and going over some slides. It's really just to cover everything about MCP and how to use the OMOT gateway. You can follow along on the docs, our docs at obot.ai here at this URL. And we'll also, during the demos, cover what, if you want to follow along with those, we'll cover what you need to do there. This session will be recorded and delivered to our attendees. So if you missed something, you'll be able to go back and take a look. We do have some upcoming events. Connie?
Yep. So this is a great way to connect with the Obot team. We are we'll be at the MCP Dev Summit in Europe, also hosting it. So that's taking place October 2nd in London. And if you guys can join us, we have tickets at a discount until August 31st. So make sure to register early because we're due to sell out soon. And if you can't join us in person, every week we have another stream called The Context. It's all about MCP, what's happening, new software that's coming up, the latest updates on the protocol itself. So join us every Thursday at 10 a.m. on YouTube.
Great, thanks. So what are we going to be going over today? We're going to be just kind of taking a quick survey of everyone online, see kind of where we're at and some basic questions. And then we'll go dive into what is MCP, do some demos over, just kind of see it in action, go over the enterprise architecture and opportunities and challenges of bringing MCP into your organization. And we're going to go over the architecture and then walk through a deployment of the gateway to see, how all of these pieces fit together. So first, let's just do a quick survey. I think we've got a poll that we can share out here. If you wouldn't mind taking a moment to answer a few of these questions, just be really helpful. Thank you. Getting some good response rates. Appreciate that. And it looks like we've got a good mix of experience with MCP servers and yeah, so we'll just give this one more minute.
While we're letting that run, I just want to mention, if you have any questions, just type them into the chat and we'll do our best to address them, as they come in. But if not, we'll do some Q&A once you're done, Bill, if that works for you.
Yep, we'll definitely save some time at the end to answer some questions.
Great.
Cool. All right. I think we've gotten a good mix. I think we've got a good mix of experience here. So I'm going to end that poll. Thank you. Cool. So yeah, we've got a good mix of experience with MCP. So I think this will be a good talk. So first, let's just kind of dive into MCP and what we're looking at here. Oops. So just high level, the MCP protocol, think of it like the USB port of AI applications and an easy way to connect your AI models to data and systems in a standardized way. And this is just to really enable a lot more automation and give a lot more context into what your models will be able to help you do. And so looking at the core components of what makes up MCP, you have the host, which is an LLM app, think like VS Code or Copilot, Claude Desktop, and all these applications that are going to be interacting with the AI model. And then you've got your MCP clients. And so each of those has more than one potential MCP server that it's interacting with, and each one of those connections is the client. And so you're interacting with the AI. And then you have your MCP servers, which are just lightweight programs that are serving up the content. And those can be running either locally on your machine and interacting with files or the system itself, or served up remotely over the internet. And so it's pretty important protocol in that way that we're standardizing all of this. It's a community-driven effort. Anthropic, released this as an open spec. And so by everyone adopting it, we're getting this universal way to connect these models. And so it's helping build up that ecosystem, and it's simplifying the development so that there's an incentive for people to build these MCP servers to connect to these systems, and you don't have to do it uniquely for each client or each model or each brand. And so that's really helping speed up the pace at which you can actually start leveraging AI to help you in your day-to-day workflows and your day-to-day interactions with systems. And so just kind of diving into what does that standardization look like, it's really specifying how do we authenticate and serve the protocol, which is leveraging streamable HTTP or doing OAuth. It's giving you ways to describe how to prompt and interact with the system. It's the tools themselves, which is the mechanisms in which APIs or databases are interacted with, your resources or your read-only content, and then it's actually got quite a few things under the hood that are really powerful, but less common, is like the ability for an MCP server to actually leverage AI to perform its tasks, get feedback from users, and provide like a solid framework for building AI applications. The spec is continuing to evolve and getting more and more capable. So looking at it a bit more, the MCP server, is interacted with, it's a standard protocol, but then you can interact with them locally over like standard IO, which is communications over standard in, standard out. These communications just happen kind of easily on a local machine, and we're sort of the first protocol that was released. So it's one of the more popular ones, but remotely, this has been added more recently, is the streamable HTTP, which leverages HTTP posts and gets to communicate back and forth over the line. When you're finding MCP servers and you're trying to see what you interact with, some of them you might run across SSE, which has been deprecated in favor of streamable HTTP, which includes that capability as well. So you'll be able to interact with your MCP servers remotely, which is a solid way to deploy things, if you want multiple people to be able to leverage them. And one of the big tricky things with all of this is the authorization flow and being able to authenticate with your MCP server and interact with it. And so this walks through, this is all based on the OAuth standard. With these models and these MCP servers, the challenge is you have a lot of loosely coupled clients that are trying to connect to these things. And so you don't know who's going to be deploying these MCP servers or interacting with your endpoints. And they're somewhat transient and dynamic. So the MCP spec is really pushing the boundaries and pushing forward OAuth and what it's capable of. But at a high level, you have your clients, they reach out to their MCP server to authenticate. It gets a 401 if it hasn't been signed in already. It goes and reaches the well-known metadata information, and then actually goes out and then from that goes and reaches out to the authorization server. And gets that metadata back and is then requests the token, gets the access token, and then assuming all of that went through and the user's authorized, you can start making requests of your server. Yeah, a lot to cover there. We went a little bit quick. Not sure if there's any questions, but let's kind of dive in and take a look at some MCP servers in action. I think an example always helps clarify things. For this part, I am going to use Goose. This is put out a client that's put out by Block. And so it's open source. It's a really powerful agent chatting platform that runs locally. You can build and interact with MCP servers through it. So it's a good way to demo. So this is Goose. I've downloaded it. I am talking to OpenAI, GPT-5. I have my workspace directory. And so here I can set up my extensions. I am going to add, or I've added the DuckDuckGo extension. This one's very simple, but it's an example of standard I/O. This will be running locally and interacting with DuckDuckGo for searches. And so, a lot of these MCP servers are installed either in Python by UVX, or if you're on the TypeScript node, you have the NPX, and so those will get pulled down and it'll get run locally for you. So I've configured this one. If you're wanting to mess along, if you have Goose, you can try this as well. And also for the next one, I'll show you on chat.obot.ai, and you can see you can also try it there, but I'll show you. So here I can say look up the latest OpenAI news, and so now this MCP, it's reaching out to the model, and what's happening is the model has been, has the initial prompt, and it's getting a list of tools that come from the MCP server to perform searches or get content. And so here I've turned this on. There's different settings that you can set. So I have it prompting us for all of the tool calls that it's going to be making. So it wants to call the search tool. I'm going to allow each one of those calls. You can see that it's running these queries and getting different results. So now it's got all of that information that's been brought back into it, and now it's looking for its own extensions, because I guess it doesn't like whatever it came up with. It's being a bit zealous in how it's trying to accomplish the initial prompt. But basically, it's using tools, MCP servers in the background to reach out and query this. When I did it earlier, it was much more succinct and just performed a regular old search and got information. But yeah, so this is an MCP server that is running locally and interacting with this. Let's take a look at running it on a different client, and I'll show you like a remote one. So here you can follow along. I'm on chat.obot.ai. If you have a Google account, you can sign in. These are totally free to try out, no cost or anything to you. So here I am going to look at these connectors, and these are all the MCP servers that we can leverage. Why don't I add, let's try Google Sheets. And so this one, I'm just going to be able to interact with Google. So now I've got Google Sheets. So here, I now, to use this server, I have to actually authenticate with the MCP server, which is going to get me access to the Google. And so here I go through the OAuth flow, getting asked to interact with this. I'll pick my account and authorize this. Great. Cool. So now I am authenticated with Google, and we've got our Google Sheets. So now I can just be like, create a new spreadsheet. So it'll go reach out and call into this. So here, you can see that we're calling the create spreadsheet tool. You can see how it was called with what parameters, and you can see the output. So when a tool call is made, that is presented to you by the MCP server. So here we can look at the Google Sheet MCP server, and you can see the individual tools. So we can list, we can create, read, we can delete, update. So basically manipulate a Google Sheet here. And so these are all the options that the LLM, in this case GPT-4, has to pick from when it's trying to answer a user's request. So going back to that, so we did create our sheet, and now we can do things like create headers in the sheet, name, email, and phone. And so now it should go ahead and create all that as well. So yeah, that is basically MCPs in action here. They can do a lot more. You can see there's a bunch of different types and lots of MCP servers out there to interact with. But just wanted to give you a basic overview of what it's like to interact with an MCP server. So in this case, Goose and Obot were our hosts. Our clients were the connections to Google Sheets or the DuckDuckGo, and the servers were either the local DuckDuckGo MCP server running or the remote MCP server that we're interacting with Google Sheets on. Any questions? Just want to make sure we got a moment to answer questions before.
Hey, Bill, we do have one question. It says, how do you connect it to your own MCP server?
I guess which client? So in Goose here, for instance, there's the extensions, and you add your custom extension. And so instead of connecting it to DuckDuckGo, you would run the command here to connect to your server. And so you can also connect to this. I will show you in the a little bit later as we go into the gateway. I can unpack adding your own MCP servers and adding that to like a catalog, and we can show from there. But totally possible, and I'll definitely make sure to address that as we get going or later on. Cool. So enterprise opportunities and challenges. So the main thing about MCP is, and you kind of were able to see a little bit in the demo, is because you can plug these, you can use these MCP servers to get your data and your information and bring that in, and then leverage, the power of the models to interact with these systems, you're able to really build some very useful automation. So like being able to, query, the news for a specific topic over a period of time, on a regular interval, have those articles added to a spreadsheet and maybe, updated. You can almost generate you generate your, company newsletters. So you're able to do these things quickly and without having to do it all yourself. So you get these productivity gains. You can pull that information and summarize it really fast to help make better decisions. As you're moving through and you're giving these tools to your end users. You're really it's pretty amazing to see what people end up doing with these tools once they kind of have the ability to kind of connect these dots. They'll typically surprise you, both in a great way and in type of way when it comes to their own workflows and trying to get their job done. And the more you can kind of give these tools to your workforce, or just or bring them into your workflows, your teams are really going to be able to start pulling things together and be able to move a lot quicker. But these do come with a bunch of challenges as well. The MCP ecosystem is still pretty new, and so with that, it's a relatively new and evolving standard, and the community is moving fast and trying to address a lot of these. But there's still areas of security and data governance, maturity, quality maintenance, and all of the complexity and skills gaps that just come with both general AI and then interacting with other systems. So diving into it a little bit, the security risks, I think recently we've seen some of the initial, as these are rolling out, you're starting to see some of the initial attack vectors and security escalate, or I guess breaches that have happened with content getting leaked between tenants or something along those lines. And so the way that these servers are built, they're introducing things that are just new for us as we keep going. So part of the risk is these prompt injections where tool descriptions or some content from another, like an untrusted source, ends up into the model, and it could contain instructions that then have it do random things, which could lead to other issues as well. There's no runtime enforcement. There's the rug pull attack, which is when you look at it one way, or before you start using it, the server starts up and then starts behaving a completely different way. Supply chain compromises, as we saw, we're installing these. A common way to install these is from UVX or NPX, which is pulling them from the internet. And so that content is, well, from registries like PyPI or NPM, which those are secure and trusted, but they have had issues in the past. So it's still a potential vector for these MCP servers.
Hey, Bill, I've
Yeah.
got a question here that says, how would OAuth work if it's API to API without browser cookies? Our client application would be calling Obot gateway directly. Just want to learn a little bit more about that. So we're talking about security.
Yeah. So that one is a bit tricky at the moment. They are working on that in the spec to use, it's a client secrets, I think it's called, but basically machine to machine authentication through OAuth. So that, I believe, last I checked, was working its way through the next draft of the spec. And so we should have something that should be addressed. Today, it would be a bit today would be a bit more tricky to do without some sort of manual intervention to actually kind of do the authorization flow to get the ticket or the tokens where they need to be.
Great, thanks. And
Mhm.
there's one other question about a potentially security related, but a user said they recently attempted to use MCP to write to a local database, but it was unable to get it to write to Postgres. They're wondering if this might be a config issue or more of a security issue with the MCP server.
Um, I think it would depend. It depends on where the MCP server was running, where the database was running, how it was set up. Uh, there's potentially environmental issues. So I don't know. Yeah, that one's a little vague to answer, but if they want to follow up in like a Discord or something, happy to chat about that and
Great.
walk through that with you.
Awesome. Thanks.
Mhm. So touching on data governance and compliance, an MCP server is another party that's now in your flow of data and information. And so, what information is going where. This MCP server could potentially, list a bunch of, database rows, which then end up going back to the model for processing, which, you know, that may be okay. That may be something you want to look into more, just having that understanding of where information is flowing in the organization just to make sure. And then, today there's no centralized auditing or usage information for this. So, being able to go back and say what happened or why didn't this happen or what was going on isn't necessarily built into the protocol. And it's something that you need to be aware of as you're working through adopting MCP and bringing that into the org. And again, the ecosystem is, it's moving fast. It's new. I think we'll see its first birthday here in the next couple of months. So in that time, it is gained massive adoption, but it's continuing to evolve as it gets that adoption, and when we learn more, we can do more, or we can do better, and it keeps improving. So the protocol is evolving, the authentication mechanisms are evolving to handle some of these machine-to-machine flows, and then continuing to add capabilities to the core spec to enable different things. And a good example of that recently was elicitations was added, which is the ability for the MCP server to reach back to the user and say, hey, I need this extra information before proceeding, or do you want to actually perform this delete operation, type of confirmation. So it just continues to move. And because it's new and because it's so useful, there's tons and tons of open source MCP servers of very varying quality. Some of them are useful, some of them are terrible. A lot of them were designed to address an individual's use case, and not necessarily thought through of like how do we make this the most usable Postgres MCP server there is. Um, but that's actually part of its benefits too, is that it is super flexible and easy. So, and the barrier to creating one to accomplish a task, at least on a small scale, is very, very quick and easy. But and as you're pulling these in, the gaps, understanding how the MCP tools are leveraged. So if you have a tool to get records, how do you actually convince the LLM that it needs to, and actually get that information from these MCP servers? And so, or just adding them to the model, that it's even an option to be able to connect the LLM to this without having to just copy and paste into ChatGPT. So, I think we're continuing to evolve and pick up these different ways of interacting with the systems. And again, it's a whole new way to do this. I think you can typically you're trying to do something that you would know how to do yourself and go and click into like a UI. Every morning you go into like Salesforce and you go pull up your leads and like how to do that. In this new sort of AI world, it's more like, just type into the text box, who are the people I need to call today, and have it get that list for you. Um, it's just sort of a shift in the way that you approach your day-to-day tasks. And so, training people up and getting them used to this, giving them access to these MCP server tools, still, there's still some work to be done there. And the thing to always remember at this time is, MCP is in the early adopter phase. And so as you pick this up, realize that there's likely going to be hiccups. There's going to be shifts in the spec and the tooling, and just what you did yesterday with a model upgrade might change tomorrow. So there's just lots of things changing all at once and moving quickly, but there's still tons and tons of opportunity. And so that brings us to MCP gateway architecture, or just gateway for MCP servers, and why you would want to do that. Just at a high level, here's sort of the architecture that you'd be looking at. And so you have your clients here on the left there in the chat, your cursor, your developer tools. If you're building agents, you're going to have those as well. And so, to interact with the LLMs, you're going to go through a gateway, and what you'll be able to do there is, see what's going to the LLM, be able to put guardrails, those tools, those policies. That's where you can really capture that information of, what's going to the model. And then it gives you that centralized point to be able to constrain or filter, or just make sure that it complies with the way that the government or your governance policies dictate. It also gives you a place to audit and see who's what was asked and what did the LM do, and be able to go back in time and look at that. The other piece of this is the MCP catalog bits of this, and that is just the service catalog of what MCP servers are available, where do those come from, where are you pulling those MCP servers for installation? Just those systems that you feel in your organization are vetted, and that you'd feel comfortable with your end users and developers and your autonomous agents, or semi-autonomous agents to connect with and interact with your systems and your data. And then the other piece of this, finally, is the MCP gateway. And so this is the piece, that you kind of brings a lot of this together. But with the MCP gateway, you're curating the catalog, you're giving access control to who can interact with what system. You're able to audit, get that visual visibility into the things that are happening with those MCP servers. You're possibly running them behind the MCP gateway, but you basically gives you that centralized focal point to focus on and apply policy and visibility. But again, the best way to see some of these things is to get a good demo. So let's walk through the Obot gateway. Cool. So this is the main login page of the Obot gateway, or the admin panel of the Obot gateway. And what you would do initially is configure like an auth provider. You'll sign in and configure who has access to these systems. This particular one, on Obot, we do have the chat capability. So we do have the ability to configure which model you want to be able to use. And so you can come in here, put in your API keys, and then set defaults for your end users, so that they're not having to jump in and know everything that's going on with those models. And then here, you configure chat, sort of the base chat template and how it's personality. But then here is the MCP server catalog. And so with this, you can manage this with through a Git URL. So if you've got existing workflows and you want to have people be able to add entries via PRs, or so you can kind of work through it that way. That's totally possible. And then all of these entries, in fact, are actually pulled from a Git catalog as well. But what you're doing behind the scenes is you're adding MCP servers to your system. And so there's a couple different ways that you can do that. So there's the single user. So think of this as like a one-to-one between the end user and the instance of this MCP server. So this server might require like an API key from the user, but once it's deployed, it is meant just to interact with that individual. Then there's the multi-user server. And so this addresses two use cases. One of them is the company wants to be able to provide the ability to get weather from the chatbot. And so we've got this one weather API key that we're going to add into this MCP server. And then everyone who adds it to their chatbot would be able to get access to the weather through that API. The other is that you would deploy it, and then it would handle authentication to a third party through OAuth or something, or another system. It would handle the multi-tenancy side of it. And so you would just log into that. And then the other is the remote server. So this is for your streaming HTTP services that are hosted by either yourself and your organization. Like if you've got a way to deploy MCP servers in your environment, this would be the way to add that. And so, or if you're using a third party like, Linear or Neon or several other providers that build them. And when you're adding your MCP server, you'll see it's pretty standardized UX. It's similar to what you would do in Goose, similar to what you would do in like a VS Code. It becomes very straightforward, very simple to add these. So here you've got your MCP server, you give it your name, the description, if you want to give it an icon, and categories. But we're back to being able to run either the NPX, the UVX, or a Docker container. And so one of those commands will then fire it up. You give it the package, and then if it takes any arguments, you can add that as well. The other bit is you can add user configuration. So if it does require that API key, you can say API key. And then basically it would be sensitive and required. So when the end user actually goes to deploy this MCP server, they would be prompted for this information before it actually launched. And this really helps with some of the education side of it of, when you come across an MCP server, there's not yet a standard way of like describing how to deploy it or what information it needs. But we think this helps. And all of this can be configured via those Git entries as well. And so you can build your catalogs that way. And once you've deployed this and you've got that deployed, your end users would come into the gateway and they would see this view. And so this would be all of the MCP servers that they have access to configure. And so say they wanted to add like a Git MCP, which is an MCP server that helps you get the documentation for a Git repository. And so here, you get the overview. You can see what tools are available to once you deploy it, what they are, and then you can connect to the server. And so this is making use of those parameters I was showing you when the administrator was configuring the entry. So it needs, you can have an alias, but it definitely needs the URL that is going to be needed to communicate to deploy and have this actually work and pull the documentation for you. Once you have those configured, and you can configure all of the ones that you want to interact with, and so you can generate like a unit, like the whole config. And so here, this would be what you would paste into Cursor. Here's what you would paste into like a Claude Desktop or a VS Code. And so these, basically would be able to connect to any of the MCP servers. And so I think just for fun, we can maybe try this. We'll go with linear. See if we can just connect that up with Goose. So add a custom extension, say linear. It's going to be a remote. And so the endpoint URL is just going to be this. Now this, it's important to note, is tied to me as the my user. If someone else was to configure this, they would have a different URL. So let's add that extension. So now I've kicked off. What it just happened here was I added it. It tried to activate. It sent the request. It got the 401 response back from the OBot gateway, and then went through the OAuth flow. So now that I'm logged in, I should now be able to go and chat and say, what are my linear projects? And so here, this should make a request to the OBot gateway to list my linear projects. I'm going to say yes, allow. And it's making that call. One thing about Goose is it does not do streaming responses, which I feel gives you that feedback that it's actually doing something. But it's making that tool call. And we're not really that worried about the results. So let's go ahead.
Was gonna jump in if there's some questions if we wanted to go through them while we wait for Goose to respond. Because this one asks like for a single user MCP server, how do you handle the user's credentials?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
So when you deploy the server, so there's two parts. One, when you define the single user server, here what you're defining is the entry in the catalog. And so this user supplied configuration is where you would say, API key, and then it's sensitive and is required, and the key to the service. So you would define it here. And what happens is when the end user goes to deploy, let's say they want to use the default, like the official Amazon EKS server. And so when they click connect, here is where you would provide the individual's keys. So here is where you would specify that information. And so what happens is I give it my Amazon access key and secret key and a session token in the region. This gets deployed behind the scenes by the OBot gateway just for me. And so this would only interact with it would interact with my API keys, but only I could interact with it. If someone else also wanted to deploy the Amazon EKS service, they would get their own instance and have to provide their own keys. And so we would each be interacting with Amazon as our individual selves. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, and related to that, so Obot provides its own API key, or is that through? I guess the question is, does Obot provide its own API key folder?
So the MCP servers, we're following the spec and doing OAuth. And so what you're doing for your end users to interact with the system, you would configure one of these auth providers. You would, when the end user goes to connect to these endpoints, so whenever they go to connect to one of these endpoints, it will do the OAuth flow, and the user has to authorize and log in, and then they authenticate with the Obot server. And then there's the third party, the MCP server, if it requires connections as well. We help facilitate the authorization flow, the OAuth flow for those servers. So when I added the Google Sheets earlier, and it prompted me to log in with Google. I had already logged in with Obot, and so then I had to authenticate to Google, and I got my tokens through the OAuth flow, and those are tied back to me in my session. And so those are being used. When you deploy the API key, that's deployed. You're OAuthing, the individual is OAuthing to the gateway, and then like the Amazon one has the keys set as environment variables in the MCP server's runtime. And that is, so you're authenticating to request the AWS service to do something for you, and then it uses the tokens that it has available to make those requests. This is the area that is there's a lot going on in the authentication side.
Yeah. Thanks for answering that, Bill.
Yep. So anyway, I'm not sure if Goose did what we wanted, but what we should be able to see, and really what I was going for, was the idea of using the gateway was to have this visibility. And so we can come back and look at the audit logs. And so here you can see that I've been doing a bunch of things. And so you can see the different clients that I've been using. So I've been listing tools. And so here you can see what I had been, the request headers, you can see the body, and you can see the responses. What's coming back and forth from the MCP server and going through. And so whether you're interacting with it through the Obot chat or whether you're interacting with it through the a third-party client, so a VS Code or a Goose or one of those, you'd be able to see this information. So here you can see through Obot chat, I was communicating with Google Sheets MCP server, and you can see what was sent there. The other thing is, while you're using the gateway, you can get a good view as an admin of what's actually being used, who's doing what. So here, we've got the most frequent tool calls, the frequently used servers, response times, any errors that were going on. You can see who are your power users and what are, you can kind of dive in and get some visibility into what's going on. The other thing that's pretty powerful is when you've got these servers deployed. This is an individual, like the Tavily one. You can see, you can drill into a specific server. You can see its usage, its audit logs, but the access control. So actually, we didn't touch on that. So access control real quick. If you want to build different views of the catalog for different teams, you can say like, your marketing team is going to get, that, and these people will be involved in there. And we're going to add these MCP servers. They're going to need, they're going to have to do search. They're going to need Notion, and they're going to need email. And so when they log in and they come to their MCP server, my connectors view, they would only see the MCP servers that they were given access to. And so it's one way to sort of, be able to kind of partition out the main catalog with all the entries so that, it's not overwhelming for other users or other teams to have access to those things. So yeah. So that would be the access control. And then because OBot Gateway is running this for you, behind the scenes, you can see, what was deployed. You can get the deployment logs. You can see the status of it because it's running on infrastructure that's being managed by the OBot Gateway. Cool. So yeah, I think that's the demo. But if we have questions or want to save a little bit of time for that at the end here.
Yeah, we definitely still have a few questions here. I think you might have covered some of them, so I'm trying to make sure we get through some of the key ones. So here's what Martin's asking if he has an MCP server and a client using Keycloak. What would need to be set up in the OBot gateway in order to use it and implement with official MCP TypeScript SDK?
Yeah. So at the moment, OBot doesn't have a Keycloak plugin, but that would be one that we would need to add and just sort of, it would be pretty straightforward. It is open source. PR is welcome. But yeah, so you would tie the authentication bit here. And then as part of when the MCP server is deployed and configured, it would be set up and configured for the deployment bits on its side. Yeah, so depending on how that environment, like how that server needed to be configured for OAuth. So if you deployed it, it needs to communicate with a Keycloak endpoint. You would need to be able to pass that configuration information to the server. And the way you do that is through these environment variables that would be deployed out there. And so it would, that's if you wanted OBot to run it. So you'd pass it configuration through environment variables. It would get deployed. Your MCP server would start up, read those configurations, and then have that information to run. The other mechanism is as long as it's following the spec, if you were deploying that through its own like CD delivery pipeline and it's just exposing the streamable HTTP endpoint, in that case, you would have that all configured and wired up. You would add the URL here as a remote server to the OBot gateway. And so when you'd just give it the URL. And so then when the user goes to communicate with it, they would hit the 401 and OBot would then say, okay, and it would help initiate the gateway workflow. Hopefully that helps.
Yep.
I feel like a whiteboard would
sounds like it. Yeah, I mean, we could try to see if I can post these, but there is another question here, I think, about Claude giving Claude access to OBot to handle the auth to reach out to all the MCP servers. So I think you touched on that a little bit earlier. But...
Yeah, so I mean, you can connect Anthropic as the model provider for the chat, and so then that would use Claude. So your end users wouldn't actually need to sign into Claude if they were using OBot chat. Otherwise, they would have Claude Desktop, and they would have that configured and logged in to communicate with the Anthropic endpoints. And then once it's added to Claude Desktop, yeah, you would just paste this into Claude Desktop. Claude Desktop would basically go to initialize and list all of the tool, like do the things that it needs to do to start these MCP servers to get it. And it would kick off all the login flows to the MCP gateway and get that information or get the logins all handled. And then you would start chatting and communicating with Claude that way.
Very cool.
Yep.
So with OBot, one of our attendees is asking, what differentiates this from other gateways like light LLM?
So I think light LLM, it's been a while since I've looked at it. I believe that one has focused primarily on the LLM side, and it might be moving into MCP. I haven't played with it. You again, Obot is, we're open source. We're making it, easy, available to download, deploy, hook up, get the visibility, get everything you're supposed to get. Visibility, managing catalogs, and getting everything that you need to do, interact with on this side, deploy and manage some of the hosting elements of this as well. And we're continuing to build out the platform as well to, address more and more use cases. So
Thanks. I think that's all the questions I see in the queue.
okay. Yeah, so if you're looking for more information on the spec, the modelcontextprotocol.com has more information. We have the developer summits and live stream. You can get information there. And then, yeah, thank you. You can find us on YouTube and X. Thanks, everyone.